Hello, long time no see. Hope you're all doing well with COVID-19 and all the nonsense that's going on at the moment. As you can see, I've grown a beard during this crazy period. But today is going to be a good day. And the reason for that is this channel has been going a long time. One of the first sort of professional or one of the first full frame reviews that I did and long-term reviews that I did was a Hyperlow frame. And if you've followed the channel, you know that over the years I've reviewed many Hyperlow frames. And the reason why this is a good day is because I've got a new one to review. And this is the Hyperlow Airshot. Alright, so as I said, we've got two flavours of frames, the flat arm one and the Vert Style Arm. The reason why we have two arm profiles is a personal preference. The Vert Style arms are very deep and very narrow and will allow the frame to cut through the air cleaner, and the more traditional flat style arms are a preference for some people. The reason why I've got both of these frames is A, I really like the frame and I wanted two of them, and B, a number of my friends fly the Apex. And a number of my friends have found that the Apex flies worse than the older Impulse RC Reverb. And the Apex has skinny arms and the Reverb has flat, wide arms. And one of the things that we've sort of chatted about is that the wider, more traditional flat arms, because they increase the resistance in the air, they almost act like a little bit of expo on your throttle and can give smoother throttle response and make the quad feel nicer to fly. So part of the reason why I got both of these is because I'm going to run two identical frames. There'll be slightly different setups, but there or thereabouts, and I want to know personally if the skinny arms work better for me or the flat arms do. I'm guessing it won't make a huge amount of difference unless you're really comparing them back, side to side. But that's where I'm coming from. So I just want to quickly crack open one of these and we'll quickly see what we've got, which is quite a bit of stuff. And this is the vertical arm version. And one of the things that's really nice about this frame is the stuff that you get is very much tailored around its purpose. So to start off, we get a rather nice, I love these little touches, get a rather nice Hyperlow Gopro cleaning cloth, which if like me you've wasted literally hours of footage because you had a smudge on your hero, you will know what that's like. And you can see with the top plate that we've got very much a CG, Hyperlow CG profile with this flared rear section. And the carbon is just beautiful. Really interesting cuts. And of course we've got the usual press nuts, which Hyperlow always do better than everyone else. Quite often with these press nuts they come loose and they spin when you're trying to tighten them up on pretty much most of the other frames, but the Hyperlow ones always stay in place. So really interesting designs here. And this is the Vert Style Arm, which if you've been around a bit you will know is essentially, which way does it go around? That way presumably, is essentially a way to make a really skinny arm but one that is 10mm thick where it needs to be. And in terms of width, it is maybe 5mm wide. And the reason why it's done like this instead of one solid piece of 10mm carbon is two reasons really. One, cost, I'm guessing, but two, weight, because ideally you would want the brake here if you broke the arm rather than sort of along this section. So the bit that's important has been reinforced So really interesting stuff here, lots of interesting different pieces. You get a whole load of gubbins and 3D printed mounts, which as always with Hyperlow are really nicely printed. That's essentially a GoPro mount, and of course you can just use your normal GoPro sort of case to tighten it up, but I'll show you that later. We've got lots of different bits and bobs, trays, etc. And he's also sent me what I think are some of the bits that you can also choose. So we've got the same mount but in grey, which is quite funny actually. When he released the photographs, the grey was, I think, because he'd run out of black. So the frame should have come with the normal black ones, but I really liked the grey when he showed it in his photos. So I've actually been printing the same grey my end, but hey ho, doesn't matter. So we've got obviously different mounts. We've got a 20 by 20 mount, and we've also got two what I think are braces, and I'll come on to those when I've built the frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this guy together, and I'll also put this guy together, and then we'll have a walk through what the score is. I'm just going to stop my build. I've just literally started, and I just wanted to show you something. If you look at the arm brace, you'll notice that it's sort of has this cutout, the chamfer here. And this is where I get a little bit excited when I'm building things, because if you notice that chamfer perfectly lines up with this plate here to basically form a perfect fit. And then, forgetting about all these other bolts, we have this solid wedge of, looks like 5mm carbon, which basically slides in and bolts into place here, locking those arms into place. And the engineering and level of cut needed to be able to do that is really, really impressive. So I'm going to continue putting this together, but it's feeling already a super strong frame despite its slender arms. Right, so here we are. So what I've done is mocked up these two frames because there's quite a lot to go through, and it'll be kind of easier if you can see what it at least initially will look like before I pull it apart again. So as you can see, this is the Vert arm version, which essentially has these super skinny arms which are 10mm thick, as we said, because of this brace. And as you can see, it's a rather beautiful thing, and you can really see, if you've had previous Hyperlows, you can really see its heritage. Obviously we've got the Vert arms, which again have been tweaked slightly. We've got this front brace section, which is very reminiscent of one of the frames. We've got obviously the flared backside, which is the Hyperlow CG, and of course we've got this simple GoPro mount at the front, which just bolts in with an M5 bolt, and of course then you can adjust your Hero. In this case I'm using a Hero 8, so it automatically has the attachments to it, but obviously if you were using a Hero 7 you would just use the case that the camera actually came with. But because this is a Hyperlow, all the previous mounts fit it, so whatever you're using, you know, there's a mount, different couches, etc., session mounts, all the rest of it. So this is a mid-range cinematic FPV freestyle frame, and because its purpose is to be everything that you would need on a cinematic shoot using a quad without ducts. It needs to be versatile, and that runs through it. So if we just go through the belts and braces, carbon thickness, etc., and then I'll start showing you the features. So what we've really got, 2mm top plate, 2mm mid plate, and then we have this section here which is again 2mm, and sandwiched between them is a big chunk of 5mm carbon which braces the arms. And if you think of the apex with its key in the middle of its arms, and the Halo RC Osiris which did a similar sort of skeleton structure, basically this big wedge here gives the frame its strength and its thickness. And the idea of it is whatever force hits your arms, you're not going to snap bolts or anything like that. They're basically the force is going to be spread and directed to this solid chunk here. This particular one has got the optional braces on, which you can choose to run or not. Obviously, with the arms being so skinny, if you have a particularly heavy front impact, even though they're 10mm thick, the fact that they're so narrow potentially means that you could have a lateral break, and obviously these braces help spread that force even more. The frame itself is really cleverly designed. Everything slots in, so obviously the arms slot in and they all clip together, even down to sort of this particular rear mount that I've got on this quad. If I just get this antenna out of the way that I've stuck in there. Obviously it's not all screwed together right now, but this is the GPS mount which fits the Fettec GPS. I need to update this slightly because I tend to run the BN 220s or BN 180s which don't fit this particular one, but I'll update that. But you can see if you look at the mount, it has this key section again which just slots in between these two rear arms, and you can see when we're talking about flexibility, we've got the option here to have, as I said, this GPS mount. But if you don't want to run the GPS mount, you can simply unscrew these bolts here and loosen it, and then slide in the more customary Hyperlow tail, and then zip tie your antenna to the frame. Alternatively, you can see here I'm running two standoffs. You can choose to use this shorter mount and have a middle standoff here. And this is where things get interesting. Basically every hole that you see on this top plate can be used to put your standoffs in. So it doesn't matter how you're building or what you're using, whether you're using a Cadex Vista like I've hastily shoved in here to show you, or whether you're running an analog build, or even using the full DJI Air unit, you can shuffle around the standoffs to get the build that you need. So what I'm going to do is just whip the top plate off this, and I'll show you inside. But before I do, I'm just going to compare this to the flat arm version, which I've also mocked up. And as you can see, the major difference between these two guys is, of course, this guy is using 5mm flat arms as opposed to the 10mm skinny arms, and because of that it doesn't need the brace. It doesn't also need this clever chamfering of this bottom 5mm strengthening plate, and it doesn't need obviously the bolt and the press nut which holds these two together at both sides. So although the arms are bigger and wider, there's probably not that much difference in terms of weight, because what you've gained in one place you've just shuffled around to another. Now you can see on this particular one I'm using, as I said, the standard more common tail that you'll see on most Hyperlows, and the idea, as I said, is just zip tie your SMA antenna to that. You'll also notice that I'm using a different mount. This is again a Hero 8 mount, but of course this guy is one that just shoves in like so, and both of these are obviously pretty minimal mounts, but of course you can get full mounts both from Hyperlow and Thingiverse if you print your own. There are session mounts, etc., so there are plenty of options, but you can see the difference between the two. So I'm going to take the top plate off and then we'll have a look inside. Here's the two frames minus the top plate and mounts, and you can see that, as is pretty common these days, although it was first done on Hyperlow, we've got three different mounting areas. We've got 20 by 20 at the back, 20 by 20 at the front, and then 20 by 20 or 30 by 30 in the centre. And you will notice that on both frames you have the option of running these component shelves. So this is the component shelf with two standoffs stuck into it, and you'll see what you'd essentially do is, depending on where you wanted your standoffs and your component shelves, you would simply run the longer screws on these press nuts here, and that would basically allow you to put the standoffs like so, and use this shelf which presses into the press nuts on the other side like so, and then you would screw your standoffs, or of course you could run it the other way around, and it's the same at the front. So if you want to run these component shelves, obviously it's entirely down to yourself whether you choose to do so, but the idea of these guys is simply to make life a little bit easier. And the way they do that, if I just press this one on, and the way they do that is if you take your, for argument's sake, TBS, what is that, Unify Evo, one of the bigger TBS VTXs, and you attach it to the plate. The idea of these plates, instead of having your wiring all sort of messy and causing EMF noise, etc., as the world's biggest moth lands on me, causing EMF noise, etc., you would just route your wires beneath and out of the way, and it just makes life a little bit tidier. Remove the shelf out of the way and you can put obviously your standoffs in whatever position you wish to do so, or not, as the case may be. In this particular one, as I said, I'm basically just using the Vista Mount, which Richard has designed. Mine's not screwed in, but that sits over the press nuts and the longer screws, and you would just press nut on the other side to hold it in place. And again, I'm using one of the front component shelves, and in this particular case, because I'm using a Vista and I haven't really got anything else to do, I'd simply mount my receiver and buzzer there, and there are buzzer mounts as well on Thingiverse. So space wise, the ESC I've got in here is the Fettec 20 by 20, which is a pretty big 20 by 20 ESC, but if you look at the larger Fettec 30.5 by 30.5 ESC, you've still got tons of space. And although obviously lots of people will build this analog, there is, if I just move this out of the way, enough space to just about squeeze the air unit in and run no rear standoffs. And if you were using the air unit, you would use the pigtail attachments at the back. At the moment there isn't a specific 3D print for the full-size air unit, but I believe Richard is going to release one. But to be honest with you, the best way to mount the full-size air unit is just to use 3M foam tape on the back of it, slap it down, stick it down, and these things are like tanks. It's going to be absolutely fine. I will be running mine, as I said, like so, but of course you can choose to use it whichever way you will. A couple of nice things with this frame also. It comes with customized Tiny's LED lights and also customized race wire, and I've just stuck them on the arms there. Of course, if you were using the vertical arms, you would simply stick them like so, etc. So, that out of the way, what we've got here, in my opinion, is a really flexible platform to do whatever you want. And that whatever you want includes filming reverse footage from the bottom of your quad. Attach your GoPro like so to get, or should I say like so, to get chase footage. Camera mount wise, obviously this particular camera mount is for the Vista, although there's nothing to stop you using it with a mini cam. If you're using a micro cam, it will still work in there, but you also have the option of using the standard 3D printed mounts. Obviously, as normal, we get, if you're choosing to use the tail like so, there's a little pad to do that. Both of my frames don't come with the battery pad, and the reason for that is I'm just too impatient to wait for it to arrive, given the state of USPS shipping. So the actual full frame that you would buy from Hyperlow comes with the choice of 2 battery pads, a fully customized cut Uma grip pad if you like that, or a more traditional rubberized pad. I think the thing that most impresses me about this frame is the way that everything clips together, and it's like a sort of jigsaw. Everything is keyed into everything else, nothing just sits where it is. If you look at the nose, which really just slots in and then braces itself down, again it shares this key, and what it means is if all through this frame, if you break an arm, you can just loosen these 3 bolts and it will slide out. If you break the nose, you can just loosen these 4 bolts and it will wiggle and slide out. The same with the rear. So everything's really replaceable, but because it all keys together, nothing is weak. The nose itself is a bit of an ongoing thing with Rich at Hyperlow. The longer term plan for this nose and the way it's been designed is that if you choose to do, you can run an Armaton front titanium cage if you wish to do so. Not that I ever will, but the option is there, and it's been designed in such a way to allow you to attach that on. And the whole thing just smacks of man hours and effort. Even the front standoffs, because the way this is built, if you look, the carbon has been chamfered inwards, so rather than having an unusual size standoff, your standoff basically sits into the carbon and nicely lines up with the rest of the frame, and it's full of those ideas and those simple, clever things all the way through it. And for me, the thing I like most about it is simply that versatility. It doesn't matter what sized ESC I decide to use, or whether I decide to use a full-size air unit or the Cadex Vista, or you want to run, you know, your TBS Unify, however which you want to run it. You've got plenty of options, and it's entirely up to you where you put these standoffs. You know, do you want them like that to support the top plate, in the middle like so? Do you want to completely remove them and run lighter and save yourself some weight? And a lot of this will depend on the size of the battery that you're using, because the sole purpose, one of the design goals of this was to use a slightly bigger battery, 2200 mAh, which would allow you to do more mid-range flying and maybe get 5 or 6 minutes, 7 minutes flight time as opposed to 3.5 if you were burning rubber freestyling. So if we take a common 6S battery and stick, you'll see you've got acres of battery space, and I like this a lot on frames. I tend to sort of run my battery in the middle here for best weight distribution, and it also means if you're in a bad crash you don't constantly hit the back of your GoPro and smash your screen. And here is a 2200 milliamp hour battery. This is 3S, obviously it would be much thicker if it was 6S, but you can see it fits perfectly on with a little bit of room to spare. Weight wise, it's not going to be the lightest frame in the world, and the reason for that is the amount of hardware that we're using and the sheer thickness of these plates. You know, 2mm and 2mm and 5mm, it all adds up, and of course you've got an additional hardware if you're running the vertical arm version. I weighed this guy prior to putting the motors on it with 2 component shelves in and this particular mount, and also the crossfire mount at the front, which is going to be amended actually on the brace version because it needs to sit a little bit lower down. But I weighed it, and with all its gubbings on, not including the hero mount, it weighed 143 grams. But then as soon as you start removing the bits that you don't need, you know, maybe you don't want to use this, maybe you don't want to use one of these component shells, you can drop 10-15 grams off it relatively easily to bring it into, you know, I suppose a lighter freestyle weight. The idea of this guy isn't to be a lightweight frame, it's to be a cinematic, smooth flying freestyle frame, and weight, as I've always said, aids smoothness because it gives you additional throttle expo in the air, and providing you've got the horsepower to carry that weight, it's not a problem. But clearly if you're looking for a lightweight ripper, this isn't going to be it. Who is it for? Probably people like myself, smooth pilots or snappier pilots who want a sturdy frame that's going to last them, that's quality, that has a lot of attention to detail with it, and a lot of love has been put into it, and someone who wants an additional space and the additional, I suppose, customization that you can get within one build. You know, maybe you want to run a Vista in one, but you want to run analog for some serious long range in another one, and again, those options are all within one frame. You're not really being pigeonholed. Of course, you don't need to run this rear camera, although it's going to be pretty fun to do so. So that really covers it. My verdict on it is I absolutely love it, and interestingly I was expecting to love the Vert version, which is far sexier in terms of its arms than the flat arm version, but in the flesh, perhaps it's because of the orange, which I love, in the flesh I love the flat arm version, and it's the one I'm going to build first. I will build both of these and we'll see how they feel in the air, but yeah, the flat arm one is the one I love. I love them both, but the flat arm one is the one that I really want to build first, and a large part of that is probably because it reminds me of a sexed up, slimmed down Hyperlow CG, which, you know, has been my favourite frame for years now. So that's really it. Really customizable frame, tons of attention to detail all through it. You know, as I said before, the amount of cut-ins and chamfer-ins and the way this all sort of clips together is just, you know, it's an immense feat of cutting. Whoever did this whoever cut this carbon needs a pat on the back, because that's not easy to do. Any one of these bits is slightly off and you'll begin to struggle. So, Hyperlow Airshot, Vert version, flat arm version. Thumbs up for me. It's been a while since I've reviewed a Hyperlow frame. I think the last one that I reviewed was, I can't remember to be honest with you, but it's going to be good to have Hyperlow back in my life, and these two guys will be alongside my Halo RC Osiris, which is lighter, and my Project 399, which I also like. They're going to be my main quads. These guys will be likely my two favourites, and for once I'm going to be using T-Motor because I got a good deal on these Blackbird V2, so it's going to be nice to see how T-Motor stacks up to my usual RC in power. And this one I might have to pinch the RC in power Smooth X from the Project 399 because they're orange, and use those. So yeah, that's it from me. I'll do some sort of build video or build overview when I've built these guys up. Obviously we'll get them in the air and I'll have a waffle about which one I prefer in terms of flat arm versus vertical arms, and just give you a verdict longer term as to how I'm liking them. But right now, thoroughly impressed. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.